Tamriel is a land lifted straight from a fantasy book. There are heroes and villains, wonderful wizards and noble knights, cities of glass and forests of fungi. In comparison, the humble province of High Rock seems strangely familiar. The quaint charm of its hamlets and austere grandeur of its cities speaks of a gentle life. But much like the province's Breton inhabitants, looks can be deceiving. For while everything seems pleasantly ordinary, the Breton kingdoms of High Rock were centuries in the making, and this land has seen as much bloodshed as all of its neighbours. The feudal system reigns supreme in High Rock, and many kingdoms have vied for control over chunks of the province. Today we're going to learn about each of them, and which ones persist to the present day. In the words of a petty lord under the bare sigil of Windhelm named Ser Jorah, the common people pray for rain, healthy children, and a summer that never ends. It is no matter to them if the High Lords play their Game of Thrones, so long as they are left in peace. And these words ring true across the northern reaches of High Rock, as it's important to acknowledge that most Bretons do not have the luxury of caring for war and politics. For the most part, the people of High Rock divide themselves into the poor middle class and the destitute peasantry. A tiny fraction of the populace are fortunate enough to slip into the incoherent jumble of nobility and ruling families. Nevertheless, the people of High Rock are characteristically optimistic. The road to royalty is always open for those ambitious enough to walk it, and this attitude led to the creation of the famous Breton proverb, "Find a new hill, become a king." Perhaps the Breton appreciation for opportunity comes from a past permeated by Elven subjugation. When the earliest human ancestors to the Bretons arrived in High Rock, they stumbled upon a glorious civilization. The Mer of Somerset began to spread their influence across the mainland of Tamriel just prior, and the subset of elves settling in the region were known as the Dureni. Some say their iconic tower on Isle Balfiera stood before the Mer even arrived. Had it been built by the native beasts? Or was this a divine relic left over from the crossing of immortal swords that gripped Tamriel in the Dawn era? Many scholars argue that High Rock is in fact the birthplace of mortal civilization, not Somerset. After all, the Adamantine Tower hosted the convention that saw Auriel and Trinomac rend Lorkhan's heart from his chest, and countless imitations of the tower have been erected in its honour. Either way, the Nedic vagrants stood no chance against the Dureni. Fortunately for them, the elves were not eager for genocide, and opted for assimilation instead. Some elves interbred with the Nedic humans, and their offspring, the Manmer Bretons, were limited to the lower classes by virtue of being mongrels. The Dureni elves dominated the province until multiple human invasions weakened them. There were the Skyrim conquests, in which large swaths of eastern High Rock fell under Nordic control, and then came the might of the Elysian Empire, which had already wiped the Aelid elves near to extinction. By First Era 498, most of High Rock was liberated from the Dureni hegemony, and over time, elves and men alike were bred out by the dominant Breton population. All of a sudden, the lower-class half-breeds were in control of High Rock. There was no longer a limit on what one could achieve based on racial grounds, and the regions of High Rock were fair game for all. Find a new hill, become a king. Nowadays, when thinking of the Breton kingdoms, most Tamrielites would tell you there are 5, though even this is a somewhat contentious claim. But things were not always so clear-cut. When the Bretons inherited High Rock, there was no monarch ready to put his all-encompassing will into action. In those early days, the number of kingdoms was almost a subjective matter. Could any land-owning Breton call himself a king? And even then, where did one king's borders end and another's begin? This confusion over holdings was not indicative of chaos in High Rock, however, as for the most part the Manmuri people were effective in establishing well-governed settlements with flourishing economies. The Bretons expertly rose to prominence without drawing much attention from rival powers. They didn't need a bloody revolution or an armed conquest. They simply let the bigger fish rip each other to pieces. And when they were done fighting, the Breton bystanders became the largest demographic. The new majority focused not on displays of might, but instead on commerce, and founding their settlements in prime locations. Wayrest, for example, began as a sleepy fishing village. Today it is one of Tamriel's great greatest cities. And in the words of Safria Longleat, one feels that one is in a modern city when one visits Wayrest, but there is a magic in the air that could only come from centuries of civilization. He writes this in his book titled Wayrest, Jewel of the Bay. Others criticise the Breton approach to establishing civilizations, like the first edition of the Pocket Guide to the Empire, which states, Bretons are not an imaginative people. A legacy of the elves perhaps, and traditional ways are not lightly abandoned. Their villages are pleasant collections of half-timbered structures of 1 or 2 stories, with the rustic inn, a shop or two, and perhaps a lordly manor completing the picture. The traveller need not visit more than a handful of Breton communities before satisfying himself that he had captured the flavour of the whole. The people too, despite their cherished particularism, are remarkably similar in name, accent and dress throughout the province. It may be that this unacknowledged homogeneity bodes well for the future harmony of High Rock, but outside of rural farmsteads and fishing villages, what can be said about the major cities, the homes of the famous kingdoms of High Rock? Well, prior to the Warp in the West, the book of the same name claims that there were as many as 44 independent kingdoms, counties, baronies and dukedoms surrounding the Iliac Bay alone, if one includes the unconquered territories of the Hrothgarian Mountains, the Dragontail Mountains, the High Rock Sea Coast, the Isle of Balfiera and the Alakir Desert. But shockingly, we're not going to delve into all 44 of these factions. Instead, we're going to focus in on the histories of the major players. Prior to the Miracle of Peace, it seems that the 8 kingdoms were Northpoint, Daggerfall, Shornhelm, Camlorn, Farron, Evermore, Wayrest and Johanna. But after the Miracle, the Pocket Guide to the Empire claims 5 remained. In summary, shit's confusing, and there really is no confirmed consensus on this stuff. Perhaps an Elder Scrolls 6 set in High Rock will clear things up, and if so, that's only a 5 to 10 year wait. But anyway, determining the major kingdoms is made a lot easier when we look at the major regions of High Rock. There's Glenumbra, the westernmost region of the province. Glenumbra encompasses most of the large peninsula separating the Iliac Bay from the Elferic Ocean, and 2 major kingdoms exist within it. The first is Daggerfall. Considering its location, Daggerfall is the first stop for merchant ships, and was established shortly before the Skyrim conquests in First Era 246. The prevailing legend for the name of this kingdom is that the first chieftain threw a dagger and let the spot where it fell act as the border. I'm not sure what it is with mortals and throwing weapons to avoid making major geographical decisions, but let's just say that this chieftain had a less impressive arm than the Dwemer chief of the Rorken clan. By the time of King Tador's rule in the First Era 609, the Kingdom of Daggerfall had well and truly made a name for itself as the preeminent economic, cultural and military force in southern High Rock, and this remained the case for millennia. The other major kingdom of Glenumbra is Camlorn. Compared to Daggerfall, Camlorn is a relatively young kingdom, founded in Second Era 302. Duke Sebastian ruled in Second Era 582 when the capital city was ravaged by an army of werewolves. But this plight was dealt with, and the kingdom was soon rebuilt. Our most up-to-date source, the Pocket Guide to the Empire 3rd edition, tells us that Kelmina, the Duke of Camlorn's daughter, was married to Prince Cameron of Daggerfall, so it's fair to assume that the kingdoms of Glenumbra are unified, or they were at least after the Oblivion crisis. Glenumbra's southeastern border crosses into the region of Stormhaven, most famous for the Kingdom of Wayrest. While all of High Rock's kingdoms have power, there is no denying the historic rivalry between the province's 2 largest, most dominant kingdoms, Wayrest and Daggerfall. Wayrest had an uphill battle, as Daggerfall was well established at a time when Wayrest was still a peaceful fishing village. In those days, a particularly plump pikefish was the closest thing to newsworthy coming out of Wayrest. But the kingdom thrived quickly thanks to its location. By the time the capital of Wayrest had a market district large enough to host a handful of stalls, a great deal of commerce was passing through its gates. This success is in part thanks to the fall of the First Orsinium. During these founding years, the Gardner dynasty led Wayrest up the feudal ladder, and nowadays Wayrest can boast the largest and richest population in High Rock. Above Stormhaven and east of Glenumbra lies the windswept moors and barren badlands of Rivenspire. The Kingsguard Mountains guard this region from its neighbours, like sentries keeping all invaders at bay. Even the verdant plains of southern High Rock are kept out by the watchful peaks, and in Rivenspire greenery gives way to blankets of fog and fields of jagged rock. But no amount of precarious terrain was going to come between the Bretons and their industriousness. Two major kingdoms exist, though it is uncertain which is the more dominant. The first appears to have been more prominent in the First Era, while the second is considered one of the 5 major kingdoms in the modern day. The first of these kingdoms is Shornhelm. Shornhelm is the capital of Rivenspire, and much to the chagrin of the region's other kingdom, it has the flattering nickname Crown City of the North. Shornhelm actually features a rather progressive system of government, which allows a council of electives to act in a monarch's stead when no clear ruler is present. This Council of the North consists of representatives from each of the region's noble houses. The settlement of Shornhelm is said to have been around back in the days when the Elysian Empire threatened High Rock. During the Second Era, the Bretons of Shornhelm were also pivotal in the sacking of the Orcish territory of Orsinium, after the death of the Akaviri potentate Severian Chorak. Chorak had given the land to the Orcs, but with his imperial meddling out of the equation, the Knights of Shornhelm were quick to reclaim their land. Northpoint is Rivenspire's second major kingdom, built upon the important harbour town on the shores of the Sea of Ghosts. Northpoint built much of its economy on seafaring trade, as the city became an essential stop for ships making the treacherous trip along Tamriel's north coast to Solitude. This city, and the kingdom that grew from it, is a perfect example of Breton resourcefulness. It was founded by a humble trader named Eric Flodis, who traversed the inhospitable northern reaches of the province and tested the depths of the nearly frozen waters. He saw the potential of the area to become a major port, and fittingly named it Northpoint. Eventually, when Northpoint was a bustling landmark for merchants, Eric took the name of a nearby mountain as his family name, and the Dorel dynasty was born. In about a century, Northpoint was formally recognised by Empress Hestra of Cyrodiil, and Northpoint was officially a player in the power games of the Breton elite. Northpoint has historically had a rivalry with various neighbours, including Shornhelm and Camlorn, but also another kingdom far to the southeast. This kingdom was named Evermore, and it is undoubtedly the principal power in the Bankarai region. The location of this kingdom has been both a boon and a curse. A spot on the banks of the Biorse River is ideal for trade relations with Wayrest, but this spot is also right on the border to Hammerfell. The kingdom of Evermore is always involved in some conflict with Redguard aggressors, or worse, the Reachman clans of the surrounding mountains. Due to these external factors, Evermore is known for producing brave soldiers, and many Bretons from this kingdom have at some point served in the Bankarai garrison, an order of warriors devoted to manning the gates of the Bankarai Pass. The Bankarai garrison failed to prevent a Reachman invasion on one particular occasion, and this had dire consequences for each of the kingdoms mentioned thus far. During the chaos of the interregnum, an unlikely emperor rose up from the Reachman clans. His name was Durkarak the Black Drake, and he miraculously united many of the clans, forming an organised army of savages. After acquiring the Cyrodiilic throne, Durkarak launched a bloody invasion of High Rock. Evermore was sacked, so too was Camlorn. Emboldened by his successes, the Black Drake tore his way across the countryside, razing everything to the ground. But Wayrest would not submit so easily, and after a lengthy siege, the Reachmen cut their losses and pushed further west, to Daggerfall. But when they arrived at the city gates, they realised their folly. Their supplies were stretched thin, they were a long way from the safety of the Heartland, and the mighty Emeric of Cumberland hit them from the rear with an army of heavy dragoons. Durkarak was slain, Emeric became king of Wayrest, and the 5 kingdoms, Daggerfall, Camlorn, Wayrest, Shornhelm and Evermore, signed the Daggerfall Covenant, vowing to come together when faced by foreign threats. At this point in time in Second Era 542, there was no denying the fact that these 5 kingdoms were the most renowned. But there have been others to rise and fall over the centuries. Some warrant mentions in the histories, others are easily forgotten, like the northern city-states of Farron and Johanna. Both are mentioned by the book Etiquette with Rulers as being major kingdoms, making a total of 8 when we remember Northpoint. But after the warp in the west, the sources seem to concur that 5 eminent kingdoms remain at the end of the Third Era. On the 10th of Frostfall, a strange force exploded over the Iliac Bay, displacing armies and decimating whole territories. The result was a province that is more unified than it has ever been in modern history. Where once there were 100 small squabbling kingdoms, today, just 2 decades after the miracle, there were 5. Daggerfall, Wayrest, Camlorn, Northpoint, Evermore. The 3rd edition of the Pocket Guide is the most recent and most trustworthy source we have on the goings-on in High Rock. Tensions over borders still remain, but that is unavoidable. For the most part, High Rock seems to be more unified than ever before. They've switched focus from violent solutions to diplomatic ones. But the province remains a feudal one. Powerful monarchs engage in their political machinations. They forge alliances with marriage and with ink. In the countryside, some peasants are comfortable in their simple lives, providing grain to their liege lords in exchange for tenancy, while others plot grand schemes or simply pipe dreams of revolution. If a day comes when the Elder Scrolls 6 takes us to the home of the Bretons, the potential for engaging role-playing and meaningful choices are almost infinite. We can learn the truth about the kingdoms and city-states spread across the many regions. We can choose from a variety of houses and factions, and determine who wins the Game of Thrones. Breton culture is perfect for ambitious adventurers. The Pocket Guide says the people of High Rock spend their free time in nightly pursuits, real and imagined, performing good deeds and the like for all and sundry, in oft-vain efforts to achieve one day a noble status. This quest obsession, more than anything, has served as High Rock's sense of national identity, a peculiar form of altruism and mutual reliance that binds its people together. This quest obsession sounds just about perfect for a new installment to an RPG series famous for player choice, immersion, and deep world building. But with that, we come to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Drew, and I'll see you next time.